We hate villains. They make life hard for our heroes. They mock us. They're filled with hate and anger. They act like they're above everybody else. And of course, when it comes to NASCAR, we're talking about two of the greatest modern day villains, the Busch brothers. At my first NASCAR event, the 2007 All-Star Race, my very first exposure to the Busch brothers was them wrecking each other and then refusing to speak to one another until Thanksgiving 6 months later. And that was when I knew I was going to love hating these guys. And so did many others. This is their story. Kurt and Kyle Busch, right off the bat, before they ever stepped foot in a Cup Series car, embodied what many fans had come to loathe in the early 2000s. Rich kids from the West Coast. Well, Las Vegas. Close enough. So needless to say, fan sentiment was going to be against them from the start. But that's not to say that they didn't do anything to earn their hate. Kurt Busch's Winston Cup career got off to an eventful start, being the very last person to ever be flipped off by Dale Earnhardt in the 2001 Daytona 500. According to Kurt, this was the only encounter he ever had with the Intimidator. But otherwise, Kurt's 2001 season was relatively quiet. 2002 would be a breakout season though, as he won 4 races, but did so while making a powerful enemy along the way, Jimmy Spencer. Now Spencer may not have been a powerful foe on the racetrack, but he was powerful in the court of public opinion. After Kurt moved Spencer for his first win at Bristol, the two would continue to have runs for the duration of the season. After tempers rose, Spencer punted Busch at nearly 200 miles per hour heading into Turn 3 at Indianapolis. Kurt would reportedly threaten Spencer's family in Michigan the next year and receive a nice broken nose from Mr. Excitement. While Spencer would be suspended for this, Kurt, being the young, aggressive hothead, received most of the flack from the fans. Fresh off 2 years of beef, Kurt would further agitate the fan base with the championship in the inaugural chase format in 2004, when statistically Kurt was the 4th best driver of the year. We're used to this kind of tomfoolery now, but with this being the first one, and Kurt Busch of all people being the champion, yeah, people weren't very happy about this. But one division lower, another storm was brewing. Kyle Busch was also garnering a reputation as a talented yet emotional race car driver, just like his brother. Despite losing out on the championship, Shrub still secured Rookie of the Year honors and was promoted to a Cup Series ride with Hendrick Motorsports the following year. While Kyle would go on to have an impressive rookie season with 2 victories for HMS, Kurt would announce that he was leaving his championship-winning team of Roush to head for the greener pastures at Team Penske. But his contract ended under dubious circumstances, as Kurt was cited for reckless driving and was suspected of DUI. Because of this, Kurt was suspended by NASCAR and released from his contract with 2 races still remaining in the season. Fast forward a couple of years later, and younger Kyle will be facing similar issues at Hendrick Motorsports. No, not the drunk driving part, but Kyle's behavioral issues and other outbursts reportedly soured the relationship between Kyle and Rick Hendrick, leading to him being let go in favor of Dale Earnhardt Jr.
You won't believe this. The 5 car is back on track. After being involved in that crash, the driver is Dale Earnhardt Jr.
That's interesting.
Sure is.
This would serve as the catalyst for the next season, where the Busch brothers' villain arcs would both reach new heights. Selling his soul to Joe Gibbs and Toyota, Kyle Busch would dominate the 2008 season with 8 victories in the first 24 races, much to the disappointment of, well, everyone. But his biggest crime was retaliating against Dale Jr. in the closing laps of the spring Richmond race. Jr. had wrecked Busch at Kansas the previous season, prematurely ending Kyle's championship hopes, and to rub salt in the wound, stole his ride at Hendrick. So when the opportunity presented itself, Busch took matters into his own hands, cementing himself as public enemy number 1, even above his brother, which was an extremely high bar. Busch would stink up all 3 divisions of NASCAR for the coming years, often winning between 20 to 30 races a year in all 3 series combined. Bushwhacking had been a tradition among Cup drivers for many years until this point, the practice of entering Busch Series races for free wins and free money, but now it was almost entirely Kyle Bushwhacking. Meanwhile, brother Kurt's time at Penske that started off solidly enough quickly began to turn sour. The team speed just wasn't as consistent as the cars from old Roush, and Kurt's temper over the radio became more and more publicized. Ultimately, this culminated in 2011, the absolute peak of both brothers' villain arcs. 2011 was a disastrous run for both of them. Kyle's season was mired in controversy thanks to several run-ins with Kevin Harvick and RCR, and Kurt's attitude began spiraling out of control to the point where he was verbally abusing media members, ripping up quotes, and even cursing out Team Penske's technical director for the cars being too slow. And in the last 5 races of the season, both of them would suffer horrible chase collapses. Kyle's rivalry with KHI finally came to a boiling point with the all-too-well-known boneheaded move on Ron Hornaday under caution at Texas, an incident that got Kyle parked by NASCAR for the rest of the weekend. and nearly parked for the rest of the season by his team. Apparently, M&M's was so upset with Kyle's actions that they refused to sponsor him for the remainder of the 2011 season. Joe Gibbs even considered replacing him with Eric Almirola to keep the sponsors happy. But ultimately, Kyle was able to run the last 2 races with interstate batteries in the hood instead. As for Kurt, mechanical woes would eliminate any chance of him winning the 2011 championship in the final few races. And after an engine failure on lap 3 of the final race at Homestead, Kurt had finally had enough, with him cussing out Dr. Jerry Punch, who was attempting to interview him, and he apparently flipped off a Secret Service vehicle that was blocking the entrance to the garage. A vehicle that happened to have Michelle Obama inside. A few weeks into the offseason, Team Penske formally went their separate ways with Kurt, who was relegated to the backmarker team of Phoenix Racing for the 2012 season. 2012 would be miserable for both Busch brothers, as Kyle missed the chase and Kurt expectedly went winless driving for an underfunded team. Radio Sweetheart was still an entertaining race hub segment, but I think some fans were starting to feel just a tad bit of pity for the former champion, who could now barely make the field for most races. Kurt would be suspended by NASCAR a second time in June after he threatened reporter Bob Pockrass, officially marking rock bottom for his career. Kurt would then begin the slow, quiet process of rebuilding his career Furniture Row Racing and Stewart-Haas Racing over the next handful of years, while Kyle took over the family duty of providing more than enough radioactive entertainment for the fans. Kurt definitely earned himself some much-needed hero points with the release of his TV documentary Kurt Busch the Outlaw, detailing the history of his anger issues and decline in the sport and what he was doing to fix it, and by attempting the Memorial Day double in 2014. A feat that most race fans pretty much have to respect no matter who you are. This didn't last long though, as Kurt Busch's girlfriend Patricia alleged domestic abuse, leading to NASCAR suspending Kurt yet again. Kurt then stated that he believed that his girlfriend was a hired assassin, and also that she was entering his property after the two had broken up without his permission. Also, she had apparently tried to accuse multiple other partners of abuse both before and after this without evidence, and used her connections to misuse charity donations for her own gain. So yeah, I don't know if she's an assassin, but she's definitely not great. And most people realized, maybe Kurt's anger stems from a miserable personal life, and we should just cut him a break. Following this incident, the rest of Kurt's racing career would remain pretty drama-free. He was noticeably happier on the radio. He would only win about 1 race a year, but they were almost always feel-good victories, or triumphant wins over his brother, oddly enough. Kurt's infectious positivity, coupled with being an underdog driver on his way back to the top, rallied the fan base behind him, and he quickly became one of the sport's most popular drivers in the late 2010s. Kurt then went on to drive for Chip Ganassi in later 2311, where he would score his final victory in Michael Jordan's iconic Jumpman car. But unfortunately, Kurt's career would come to an end in maybe the worst way possible, a life-altering injury. A crash in qualifying at Pocono with the new, relatively unsafe next-gen car gave him a concussion that still keeps him from racing today. Later that year, Kurt would tearfully announce his retirement, but could at least do so while knowing that he was now one of NASCAR's most loved drivers after once being its most hated. As for Kyle, he too would avoid any major controversies for the following seasons. He was still a nuisance out on the racetrack and delighted in occasionally tormenting the fanbase who hated to see him win, but there was nothing like the Dale Jr. or Ron Hornaday incidents. Well, he almost hit some spectators in Darlington in 2021, but fast forward! But Kyle Busch, like most drivers, eventually cooled off. Well, not on the radio, but in the wins column. By 2020, it was clear that Kyle Busch was struggling to adapt to the new style of NASCAR with less practice and the always changing rules packages. He would only win a handful of races in his final 3 seasons at Gibbs, and every time he did, we saw a notably subdued, almost thankful Kyle Busch. A far cry from the cocky and arrogant driver of years past. But what really seemed to push public opinion in Kyle Busch's favor was how his tenure at Gibbs ended. With M&M's leaving NASCAR, Kyle became the latest victim of being a talented driver with no money. A growing epidemic that affects all levels of NASCAR. While Busch initially wanted higher offers from the team, he later publicly admitted that he was willing to make concessions and take a lower offer. But the higher-ups at Gibbs no longer wanted to speak with him, and ultimately signed the cheaper Ty Gibbs. Many viewed this as an act of betrayal from a team that Kyle Busch had built up for nearly 15 years. And so, like his brother before him, Kyle was forced into a lower-tier race team, the once great Richard Childress Racing. And while many expected Kyle to wear the black hat and be the second coming of the Intimidator at RCR, Kyle just seemed happy to still be racing in the Cup Series whenever he scored a win. And fans responded well to the newer, happier Kyle Busch.
Walks across, we're shaking hands, and the fans were cheering. Carl Edwards looked at me and goes, "What in the hell is that all about?" I said, "Kyle went to drive for RCR and Chevrolet, and all is forgiven."
Unfortunately, this joy did not seem to last long, though, as Kyle Busch now struggles just to finish in the top half of the field in 2024. But rather than be angry, Kyle Busch just seems defeated, like he's resigned to his fate of running 20th most weeks. He's quiet on the radio, he's quiet in interviews, he sold his truck team, he sold Rowdy Energy, after lead was reportedly found in the drinks, oopsie daisy. Now it seems like even the most rabid Kyle Busch haters are starting to feel sympathy for the legendary driver. A driver who, statistically speaking, should be in the peak of his career right now. But instead, he's at rock bottom, wasting his best years away at a mid-pack race team. He's still not at the level that Kurt was at the end of his career, but Kyle is certainly more well-liked now than he has been since his rookie season. The question is, will his new fans ever get to enjoy seeing him win? But that's the story of the redemption of two of NASCAR's greatest modern villains. So what are your thoughts on the Busch brothers? Leave them in the comments down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.